Welcome back to Evolving Waves, where we ride the tides of adversity to reach the shores of success. Today, we are so lucky to have Jonathan Boncek with us to share his compelling story of navigating the collapse of his family business and how the family business got to a point where it could collapse, everything in between. He discusses the emotional challenges that he faced along the way, the crucial steps that he took to keep his family united throughout this difficult time, and how these experiences sparked a profound journey of self-discovery. So be sure to tune in for insights on turning crisis into opportunity today, the importance of resilience, and the future projects inspired by his own transformation.
Before we get into his story, we want to quickly shout out our sponsor. Today's podcast is brought to you by Stingray Branding, a national lead generation-focused marketing agency that helps businesses generate an ROI from their marketing efforts, including web design, social media, Google search, email, automations, and more. Learn more about them at stingraybranding.com.
With that said, Jonathan Boncek is here to talk with us today. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Neil. I'm happy to be here.
We are so happy to have you, and just even from the few minutes that I got to talk to you before today and hearing about you from Megan, who she has now given us two great guests for Evolving Waves. So shout out to her, as well as being a fantastic story herself. Just getting to talk to you for a few minutes, I could tell there's a lot to unpack. So let's start with, let's just get right into it. You have a family business. It implodes, lack of a better word. So we're starting hot and heavy today.
Yeah.
How does the family business get to a point where it's so high, where there's so much to lose, and then talk about the implosion?
Yeah, so backing up, I moved to Charleston in 2011, and my wife and I moved from San Francisco after college. We're from Georgia, and we took off out west, go search for gold in those hills. But it was actually skiing in Lake Tahoe. Let's go out there for a year. Next thing you know, 4 years later. So we decided we wanted to start a family back in Charleston, and my wife's from South Georgia, and so her family wanted to be close to us. So they brought me the idea of actually a jump castle business, familiar with bounce houses and jump castles. So in 2012, we signed on to be the Charleston Fun Factory, an assembly line of good times. And the idea was for me to get it going. I was a photographer for the Charleston City paper full-time at that point. And I was doing freelance photography. And so I said, hey, I can get this going with my contacts, but I want to be more the marketing behind the scenes guy with the networking. And my brother-in-law would be the operations man. Everything sounded good. I got it going 2012. 2013, we're still in the red trying to make this. He moves up. And 2014 comes around, we're in the black. I start locking up some big contracts, City of Charleston, et cetera. And so we're starting to feel relaxed, and he had a grand mal seizure in the middle of the night in June of 2014, brain tumors. And all of a sudden, everything starts changing, and we are like, what do we do? So, naturally you have that, why us, why him? Obviously he has a family, and it was just very shocking. What do we do? And it really started a cascade of events where he went through 8 to 10 craniotomies over a period of time, but he couldn't work. He couldn't be the operations man. And so once I was able to kind of step back from the initial shock and the victim mentality, because be honest with you, Neil, it was like, oh my God, why did this happen to us?
Why me? What did I do to deserve this kind of thing?
100%. And I even wasn't the one with the seizures and the tumors. So it was, I can't imagine, and he definitely shared a lot of what was going through, but I echoed that victim mentality that he definitely felt as well. And long story, I go into this process of how can I make this business work so when he gets healthy, that he will be able to run this business that is fairly labor intensive easier. So I really started to dive into systems and actually software, and there is software out there with bounce house businesses to automate a lot of this stuff. And so that process starts going, and he doesn't get any better. Multiple tumors keep coming up. We moved to 2015, 2016, beginning of 2017. And me having that, I know he's going to get better. This is systematized. This is how we're going to do it. but he wasn't getting better. And me trying to push in that positive nature was actually causing a rift, because I was trying to set it up for him to make it easier, but I feel like deep down I probably wasn't being as compassionate as I needed to be there for him. And so that I can look at myself, well, that was causing a rift in the family. And we are very close. So much to as my children would be over at their house 2-3 times a week. And at that time, we're running the business out of his garage. So you can imagine the frustrations that were starting to happen. And after time, the more I would push in a positive nature, the more they would retract. And that started to become resentment towards me on both sides, actually, them to me and me to them. And I really, I came to a point, and I came up through a very competitive wrestling background. And I brought that mentality, I'm just going to outwork this problem. I can just grind it, right? And it started to grind me and my family into a nub. We had just had our second child in 2016. My wife's at wit's end, with 2 children at home under 4 years old. I'm working full-time during the week, on the weekends full-time with this business. And everybody around me, Neil, was saying, you got to get away from this business. It's killing your family. You are losing money a little bit within, because I was throwing a lot of money at trying to become more efficient, running at a higher cost just to be maintained. And it wasn't working, and the rift was getting harder. And the thing that mattered most was the family, Neil, and that was the thing that was really starting to fall apart. And so I was listening to some podcasts, and I can't even remember the podcast, was like, if you're really struggling in life, try meditation. Okay, we've all heard that, right? So okay.
Works in theory.
In theory, it's great, right? Quiet your mind. I have 18 things going on at once with 3 jobs, 2 children, a wife, a mortgage, all this. And I said, okay, you know what? I'm going to give this 30 days. I found this app called Headspace, 10 minutes a day. So I'm going to try it. And so I tried it, and about after the 3rd or 4th day, I was like, I just feel a little different. And I continued on it, and I really had an epiphany through some other things that I was reading and listening to. And there was a Wayne Dyer book called Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life. And one of the things that really impacted me in that was, if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And I really started to think about that in this situation. How can I change the way I look at my partner, my business partner? Because I'm trying to create a better environment for this business, for him and the family, but it's actually going in the opposite direction. And I had a long talk with my wife, and I was like, I think we just have to love him, because everything that we're doing, while in good intention, in a positive nature, this is causing more struggle, more suffering, more heartache. And when I was able to shift that lens, I just have to be there and love him however he shows up, and be compassionate for that person who's going through hell. I mean, straight up. And that really started to change the way that I looked at the business. And through that, the relationship started to slowly mend. And it took a long, long time. But what I realized is that sometimes if we have an expectation of the way things have to happen, then we cut off ourselves from other opportunities that might be on the periphery. And that's what really opened up, is the other ways, the other perspectives on how to operate this business in a way that, number one, I can save this family, and number two, not go bankrupt. And thankfully, we found a gentleman in 2017 that was able to purchase my brother-in-law's portion. I purchased 1%, so I would have a majority, 51%. And he was able to get out. Now, I made an offer to him as well to keep him in the business with encouragement to keep on getting better. And Neil, it was actually on the eclipse in 2017, he told me, I'm not going to take your offer. I'm going with the other offer. And that was a big hit to my ego. I thought I had everything figured out. And then that was probably the biggest and best thing for me, that he didn't take my offer. He took the other one. And I really had to sit back and say, I really don't have control over this, but let me continue to just love him with the hopes of keeping this family together. And in 2019, I told that gentleman in 2017, I said, look, I have 2 years in this. I'm going to put everything I have into it, but I want out in 2 years. And he said, well, I don't know if that'll be possible because I'm not going to be able to give you the money that this is valued at. And I said, well, let's just keep going. So thankfully, in 2019, it didn't happen the way I thought that it was going to happen. But I had to really facilitate some unique exit strategies that I was able to basically make the same amount of money on the exit that my brother-in-law made in 2017, I made in 2019. And that really, we met after that, and I said, look, we made the same amount of money, and that doesn't even matter to me. That all that matters is that this is over, and I'm grateful that you brought this to me. We made a little bit of money, but the most important thing is the family. And that really just brought us closer together and mended that. But it came from me shifting my perspective, sometimes forcibly, but to just coming at a place of love and, unconditional love. And I do believe that we have to experience conditions in this life to really understand what unconditional love is, because that's the rub, So that is the story of the Charleston Fun Factory as far as that implosion, but that was some really rough times.
Yeah, so there's so much to unpack there. I mean, I had my own questions prepared. Obviously, doing my research and getting ready for this episode, I think I can toss a lot of those out the window now because you've just opened up a whole nother batch of potential follow-ups. The first thing that I want to follow up on is when you said, I have to learn to love him for who he is and do it unconditionally. That's not easy to do, especially when it's someone who even tangentially you're in business with, let alone a family relationship with too. So how does that work?
It was tough. It took a lot, and it took a lot of me understanding his perspective and trying to have compassion and empathy. So when there was resentment or judgments on the way that I was handling it, I had to be like, let me switch shoes for a minute. And how is he, in my perception, looking at this situation with everything that has happened to him? And looking at his children, and my heart breaking because I'm a father as well, and saying, he's hurting. And the tough conversations that are coming out of these interactions are really coming from a place of hurt. And if I can be one less point of hurt in his life to try to support, then I think I'll be in the right direction. And that is hard because, again, real love is actually unconditional love. And that I learned that. Getting through all those conditions that were put onto me, I had to just strip that away and look at the bigger picture, which is the family.
So you talked just now about some of the conversations, the difficult conversations that have to be had come from a place of hurt. So can you give me an example of one of those types of conversations?
Yeah. So, I mentioned the victim mentality that happened to both of us. And there was times that victim mentality on my business partner side, my brother-in-law's side, tend to follow a fair amount of alcohol. And, running that business on the weekend, there was a situation where he had a seizure. He had been out at the beach on a Friday with some family and had a few beers. And I was on a big health kick as well. And so I'm like, what are you doing? You can't be doing this. You just got out of brain surgery. And, coming at somebody with, you should not be doing this. You shoulding all over him. And we were so busy, it was early in the spring, that I was having to run Jump Castle deliveries for Saturday on Friday afternoon, evening. And I was frustrated and I was tired. And my wife called me and said, he'd had a seizure. And I honestly was angry. I was literally angry. That compassion went out the window because I was like, I'm breaking my back here. And this is getting to the point of, I feel like my work is not really honored for what I'm trying to do. And so I came in a little hot and said, if you can't see what cause and effect is, then this whole, like, I'm ready to fold this whole thing. And, I'm not necessarily to that point of love yet. And it came out, you have no right. You don't know what we're going through. And I was like, you're right. I don't know what you're going through, but I'm walking right beside you. And I'm also, handing a check every month. And I'm willing to do whatever, but if this effort's not met, I'm done. And that was tough because there was a lot of other things said on both parts that I had to back off because the children were actually there and at the house too. And, those events, you can just see on their eyes of how that energy is affecting them. And so I slowly just backed out and said, look, I'm sorry for losing my mind, but we got to figure something out. And that situation stemmed probably 6-month cascade of really resentment and bitterness on both parts. And so there's what led to me trying to figure out a different way to do this, which led me to start meditating. But those were the situations, because as much as I pushed on the health and getting better, again, they felt like I was pointing a finger at them that you should be doing this instead of that. And no one likes to be told what to do. And so I had to really be like, what am I doing that's causing this heartache? And so I realized it was me putting expectations.
Yeah. I mean, again, I have more follow-ups even now than I had after the first question. I think that society does have a tendency to kind of sensationalize, and I don't know that there's a defined word for this, but kind of me-ize, like MEIZE, where it's always the worst because I went through it. Like, I had the worst day, not you. You can tell me how bad your day was, but mine was worse. You can tell me how bad the accident you got into 4 years ago was, but I just know mine was worse because I lived it, because it was me and it happened to me. You went through a tough time. Other people around you are going through these tough times. Is it easier now to think about and maybe even score or judge or do some kind of conversion as to who was going through the worst time? And if so, now that you have that perspective, how do you think that we can go about doing that in real time where it's hardest?
Great question. I think a great way to do it is in real time, is to start to, if you can, as quickly as you can, put yourself in the other person's shoes. And that's what I had to do because I looked at his children and I saw, oh man, to your point, looking back at it, he probably had a more hellacious time than I. He's no longer here. And, he passed at 45 years old, and, my heart breaks for that. And I am here. And so, every single person on this planet is going through their own bit of suffering in their own way. And when we start keeping score of who's more, when's the final tally?
I guess when we die, but that's not a good answer. But
correct. There is none. And I even tell my children, if you are always keeping score, you're leading yourself to be disappointed. Because it's like, well, I didn't get enough, or they did, or why didn't I get that? And it's interesting because, how can we find that in real time? And so just for an example, somebody cuts you off in traffic and they yell at you and flick you off, right? We've probably all been there.
Yep.
And it's easy to react negatively with the same energy that they just put out towards you. But I like to share with people, and I do this myself, is make up a story of why they're so angry. Maybe they just got fired from a job. Maybe, their wife is in the hospital on her last leg. Maybe whatever it may be, they're going through hurt people. And so if you can start to switch that, because we all make up stories in our head about everybody and ourselves. And so why not utilize that story to come from one of compassion instead of one of anger? And, you can decide.
It's tough because I guess it's possible that the person that just flipped you off and cursed at you out their window is just mad for the sole surface reason that you just got cut off. It could also be something exponentially deeper, and you're just not going to know. So, do you think that there's some inherent obligation on our end to just give people the benefit of the doubt?
Well, good question. And I think if you can lead with compassion and lead with empathy and maybe even some imagination, because it's all obviously it's about them. They're upset. Now, I get to decide. My responsibility is on how I pick that up, how I react to it. Responsibility, how I respond to it. And so that's where our power lies, is actually in our responsibility. And a lot of people look at responsibility as a burden, but that's actually where our power lies. So if somebody flicks me off in traffic, I have a responsibility on how to react. How do I want to feel ultimately? And think about the energetics of, if I get all up in arms and flick them off and start yelling, there could be a bunch of stuff negative that happens afterwards. Who knows? But ultimately, my nervous system is going to be amped up. I'm going to be in a tizzy, and I'm going to be frustrated. But if I say, you know what, man, I feel bad for that person because they're so angry. Hopefully something bad didn't just happen to them. I'm just going to let that go. Just those two examples, Neil, I can feel a difference in my nervous system in my body right now. And so that's where that choice goes. Because oftentimes circling back to meditation, people ask me, well, what'd that do for you? You're just sitting there. And it's not shutting off your thoughts, because it's really just being able to not attach yourself to the thoughts that are constantly flowing through. Be the observer instead of the person that is grabbing onto it. And so for me, what the meditation did, it strengthened those little milliseconds before I impulsively react. And I start to have some space there to be like, you know what, let me look at this in a different way so that I can leave feeling better of myself. And maybe in a selfish way, I don't want to take on somebody's anger. So even if somebody comes at me, I can be like, man, I'm sorry you feel that way. Or, dang, that person's angry. Hopefully they'll have a better day, and just send them a little bit of love instead of attaching myself to that anger, because I'm going to stew on that for the rest of the day.
Yeah, and I think that's a default reaction. I think that's kind of how we're programmed, certainly from a younger age. And I mean, I'll get back to the fact that there were kids present when you were having these discussions, and that's a whole different topic for a later point. But we're all immature when we're born. We don't have this maturity and experience that comes with our natural birth. And yet, if you're 18 years old and you just got your license, or if you're 20 years old, I think the human brain isn't fully formed until you're 25. So if you're 23 and you're in a car and someone flicks you off and you flip them off back and you try to tailgate them and then weapons get pulled out, that's your life, and you don't have the chance to rectify that. So what message would you have for younger people who are needing to learn this lesson, but also just is so much naturally harder for them to learn it and put it into practice in the moment?
Great question, because our frontal lobe isn't fully matured until our late 20s. And I had a unique experience. I was an overweight child in elementary school and middle school, so I had a lot of verbal bullying that happened. And it took me a long time, Neil, to realize actually that gift in that was I developed empathy and humility at a very young age to try to connect with people, because I saw how people would act and react. Now, getting to your question, what can we offer to young people to make them stop before reacting? And I have a 9-year-old son, and I give him the analogy of, when you throw a tennis ball against a wall, if you throw it hard, it's going to come back hard. And if you're right next to somebody and they throw it hard, so you have the choice to react hard to these situations, but every action has an equal and opposite reaction.
Newton's law.
There you go. And so don't be surprised if that reaction is equivalent or harder than the one that you just put out. So there's your choice. And again, take yourself to the outcome. And this does take a bit of maturity, but if people can visualize, if I react in A or if I act in B, how does that feel in that outcome? Now, that's hard to do in real time, right? But just think about the energy that is coming at you. are you going to match that energy, or are you just going to bypass it? Like through a true martial artist master doesn't have to fight. They redirect.
Yeah, and deflect back, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, deflect has other negative connotations, but yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, by the way, I had zero intentions of going anywhere close to this direction. It just came naturally.
I love it.
But I think that makes for great conversation and great content. But getting back to your business a little bit, there obviously were some of these emotions and feelings that came into play there. So how did you then, going back to those days, I guess, even back to the day of the eclipse, 2017 that you talked about, 2019, the day then, and then throughout the pandemic, I'm sure there's a lot of time to think and soul search and wonder what you did wrong or what you did right, that if you could start again, you would do again, and where things fell apart. So how do your emotions kind of roller coaster and seesaw up and down throughout that time? And which emotional responses do you think you're most proud of, that you handled the best, and which ones would you rather go back and do again?
So yeah, the great question on the emotion, because there was nonstop emotions, Neil. And so what I'm most proud of is that I was able to exit the business and keep the family together, no doubt. And I'm still proud of that to this day as far as my greatest accomplishment. And I come from that as humbly. And, I wouldn't be on this path without my brother-in-law. So I'm having that gratitude for him. Yes, it was awful what happened to him, but I'm so grateful because I wouldn't be in this chair talking to you about this journey if that didn't happen. And so, man, the emotions that would constantly go, because I would spend so much time alone delivering these jump castles by myself, and everybody around me, from my wife to my parents to my closest friends, 100% of the people around me in my support group said, get away from this. And somewhere deep down in me, I had a belief that I could exit this thing with some money and keep this family together. And so I used that metaphor for the light at the end of the tunnel, and it was just a tiny speck, Neil, and I just kept on going and pushing through that frustration of like, I don't want to be doing this. Why did this happen? To this is what did happen, and what are you going to do with it now? And that really, so I pulled a lot of that old wrestling mentality about the grinding, but it was like, look, the success that is going to happen is 100% up to me at this point. And so that light at the end of the tunnel, I really encourage everybody to have a vision for their life. And they might not be able to see that light at the end of the tunnel, but where the light comes from, Neil, is actually from you, from me. The illumination starts happening with the level of belief, and you start to feel a little bit of momentum. And that can be hard, even to celebrate the small wins. Hey, we're doing really well. There's some promise there. We found somebody else. I purchased 1%. So those emotions, I mean, it was hard because naturally, even getting back to the driver cutting you off, our first emotions are going to be typically our negative ones, right? Fear, anger, hate, resentment. And these are what come out first. And to your point earlier, you said, I think that we're instinctively, these are in us. They are, because our mammalian brain is there to keep us alive, number one. And it is there to identify threats. And so any threat in our world, we're going to then identify it. And so our natural response is to neutralize it, hate it, do whatever, which is a negative aspect. But that mammalian brain was there for us to observe threats, as in the saber-toothed tiger or the real threats. Now these threats are all live in our head for the most part. Yeah. There are physical threats out there. So,
and I guess a driver cutting you off technically it could kill you.
It could kill you.
So understandable.
Mm-hmm. And I would also, and you're more likely that driver cutting off kill you if you respond in the same energy that they responded to.
Tennis ball bouncing off
Boom,
the ball.
Right back at you. And man, those emotions were tough. And I like to say emotions, energy and motion. So if I'm going to have those negative emotions first, I'm going to respond negatively. So letting those subside, shake those off. And let's get to work here, because it does no good for me to be angry, moping, crying about how bad this stuff is. that doesn't help anybody because it's only up to me. And so I really had to really learn what perseverance and determination was, but just take care of this weekend with the jump castles and we'll worry about next weekend, and just one step at a time.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, the very fact that I had a lot of questions to ask you about your business and the business ventures and what you learned from them, and I think you have answered some of those, but the fact that we go from there to a very worthwhile lesson about how Newton's third law of energy can literally save your life one day if you're in a road rage incident, I think is pretty telling.
Yeah.
It's very, again, it's programmed into us, and it's just very, very innate and inherent, and we have to learn how to manage that and walk that line. And, talking about your business, you talked about what you were most proud about and what you kind of wish you could do again, sort of. I guess we all learn from our experiences and we're all better from it. Like you said, F is for feedback, not for failure. So you do learn from it and get better because of it. Nonetheless, I think there is some regret in not just your mind, but everyone's minds when they did something that didn't turn out to be the best. So the next question that I have is, how did all of this help you develop a better understanding of yourself?
Yes. Thank you for asking that. One quick thing I wanted to add when you're talking about the Newton's third law, there's actually it's called Hanlon's razor.
Yeah.
Don't attribute to malice what you can attribute to incompetence.
Yep.
So that driver, they're incompetent in that situation because they're overcome with rage. So is it directed towards me? No, it's their situation that they're just being incompetent. Yes, they're directing this anger towards me, but it's saying more about them. And that's a great way, going back, if we can teach young people that. Don't attribute to malice what you contribute to incompetence or stupidity.
Yeah, I've heard it as stupidity, but yes.
I'm trying. Yeah. So
the metaphor is quite similar.
Correct. But it's a great. He's like, whoa. Okay. So, how did that? Your question was, how did that really help me to understand myself more? Yes, and those dark nights driving around by myself and changing the way I look at things, and the things I looked at change. And I was in my late 30s when this was going on. And I mentioned that I had been, an overweight child growing up. I was the biggest kid in elementary school, second biggest in middle school, and it was so tough. But one night I was driving around and I got home. My kids were asleep. My wife was asleep, and I went in to the bathroom, and I was looking in the mirror, and I realized something, that I had never looked at my own eyes in the mirror. And it was interesting because I was like, I've always looked at parts of my body that I disliked. And I got really close to the mirror, so close that I could see my own reflection in my own eyes. And this was uncomfortable. I'd never done this before. And I just said, I'd learned this from a podcast called Oponopono, which is a Hawaiian modality of healing. And I just said, I love you, I forgive you, and I'm sorry. And I got chills now because, just started weeping and I couldn't stop. And I realized while I had this driven personality to persevere, I was still very hard on myself in a critical stance, not a supportive, constructive stance. And that was such a big turning point in my life, because I realized that I am incorporating some of these by saying, hey, I am the light at the end of the tunnel. But sometimes that negative speech, even when it comes to like body image in the mirror, was this, I'm still not good enough. And so then to look in the mirror and connect with that person that is inside me and accept them and all the flaws, that really changed, honestly, my entire life. That from that point, and I was in there for a while crying, ugly crying, and not what you want to see in the mirror. And for a male, this is hard. But I challenge everyone to do that, because every time I looked at myself, I was looking at the parts that I disliked that weren't good enough, and I realized that compounded into me really not feeling like enough. And so once I was able to realize that, hey, I have some very unique talents and attributes and skills that maybe I can lean into who I am to serve people in my own unique way. Because nature does not replicate, and there's a reason for that.
It does not.
Right? No snowflake, no two thumbprints, no two irises of the eye.
Raindrop, yeah.
Anything. And so what is that here for us to learn? I believe it's number one, acceptance. Because we're all worried about how we're perceived from other people, but the truth is every single person's different. And our superpower is our authenticity. And I started to lean into that more. And I had a coach that was like, what gives you energy? And this was after I started meditating, kind of right near the exit. And I was like, honestly, it's having deep conversations with people that I really feel inspired. He's like, you need to go after that. And I was like, yeah, I do. Because I have a unique story. And it's not to say my story's better than anybody's, but you are best suited to serve the person you once were. And each of us are. And so how can I start to figure out a way to serve people in my own unique way? And that started with fully accepting myself, because no amount of self-care is going to make up for a lack of self-acceptance.
Yeah. Well, I can see why you have entered the world of therapy. I think I actually, in playing back some of my own comments to you and maybe and even some of the teasers on social media for what's coming next for Evolving Waves, I may have lied in saying this is going to be a 3-part series, because this can be a 40-part series very quickly. But so before, and I think it probably is best if we break that up into its own show, but just to wrap up this first piece of going down the story of how things fell apart, how much do you draw upon those own experiences? And maybe this goes back to the whole me-izing aspect of things, but how much of your own struggles, F's we won't call them failures, like you said, we'll call them feedbacks, but from your own experiences, how much of that do you draw in helping your patients versus how much of it is listening to their own situations, which are, like you said, unique, no two things are alike, and taking the feedback that they give you about themselves to provide help for them?
Yes. Yeah. That is the biggest thing that I can do is listen to people, because we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. So let me listen twice as much as I speak. So many of us just want to be heard because we never felt like we've been heard. And so that listening to my clients tell their stories, and we can get into this on a later podcast of specifically what I do with rapid transformational therapy, because we utilize hypnosis to go back to scenes of where they interpreted negative ideas about themselves. And so if throughout the process of RTT therapy, as well as listening to people's stories, it's really finding those nuggets of, this was a hard situation, this was traumatized, victimized. Every aspect, everything in life has a polarity. It's really, Shakespeare said, nothing is neither good nor bad. Thinking makes it so. Judgment makes it so. So just like I mentioned that I was the fattest kid in elementary school and high school or middle school, that gave me empathy and humility. That was the gift in the hardship right there. And so if I can offer, because again, I'm not going to tell any one of my patients, anybody that I work with, what to do. What I want to do is offer ways to shift their perspectives, to find the little bits of nuggets of gold, the true alchemy led into gold. Those hard years with the jump castles, that hardship, I would not change for anything now, because it led me to this new era. So oftentimes the hardest things in our life actually equip us, if we choose to look at it, to really step into that authentic self that I spoke about that's in the mirror. So yeah, it's hard, and I have to meet everybody where they are at, because I can't come off with all these quotes and spiritual woo-woo stuff, or if somebody's not there yet. And so it's a process of really, let's dissect these situations. And yes, we know all the bad that came from it. How did you change differently? What attributes that actually are different in you now that you do appreciate, that might have came from that situation that was really hard?
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like I've kind of stolen money from you because I'm getting a therapy session
It's
not even paying for it.
Hey, I just want to provide value.
But yeah, I mean, I can even see some of the of the points that you've made just come back around in full swing with other things you've said. Like, for example, nothing is good or bad, and yet it's how we think about things that makes it so, from Shakespeare. Well, you talked about being bullied as an elementary school, or as an elementary school kid. That happens to kids, and they become school shooters. It happens. I mean, you read some of these manifestos from some of these people who wind up being messed up in the head. Well, that's, like we were talking about earlier, not programmed into you. And now that I think about that, I'll probably have to go bleep that out for YouTube because that's a sensitive subject. But people can take these exact same experiences that you had and use them as fuel to do something terrible. You didn't. You used it for good. How? That's my question, because it's so easy to take it and go the other route and just say, screw the world, and I'm going to just return this energy back to sender, like you're talking about with Newton's third law of motion, throwing the ball at the wall and it comes back just as hard. You could reverse that and say, well, this energy came at me this hard. Why should I not return it to the other side? How do you use it as a source for good?
Yeah, great question. A battery, Neil, has both a negative and positive terminal, but there is energy in that. So when you're in that negative energetic space, because there's a lot of energy in rage. Outrage, right? That is rage coming out. There's a lot of energy in hate and resentment, to your point about those situations with the students. And if we can start to teach children, that hurt people. And when there is a bully, it's like a metaphor for a seesaw. And so if we have a seesaw here, that bully feels down here, and they see you up here. And so what they must do is then diminish you so that seesaw comes up and they're on a higher level. And so starting to teach kids, and even like I have a 9-year-old and a 12-year-old, that when there is a bully situation, that those are hurt people that feel some sort of emotional needs not being met. And so they need to then hurt somebody else to feel better about themselves. But the biggest thing we can do is be the biggest coach, supporter of our own self in our head. That when there is the bullying or negative energy towards me that's verbalized, that I'm going to be in my head and be like, John, there's 8.5 billion people on this planet. There's going to be 8.5 billion reputations of me because that's their perspectives of me. But all that matters is my perspective of myself, that I love myself and I'm going to support myself. Now, this isn't being naive and being like, oh, I love myself, I can do whatever. When I am struggling or facing challenges, I'm going to speak to myself as I would be speaking to my 5-year-old self. Hey, buddy, you got this. Keep going. Encouragement, support, love. Instead, as adults, we'll be like, oh, you're such an idiot. Why'd you do that? You're never going to get things right. So that is, again, starting to reiterate that negative feeling within the body, like I'm not good enough. So it's tough with children because they're not developed, and children can be very mean, right? And that's what they see. But children need 4 basic needs. They need to be seen and heard. They need somebody to be proud of them. They need to feel significant to somebody, and they need to feel loved. If they don't get those, they will fall into 4 different roles: the perfectionist, the high achiever, the perfectionist, the sick one, the caregiver, or the rebellious black sheep, because they're getting attention even though it's negative. And so the best thing we can do for our children is to make sure that they feel loved. And that is hard in this world because everybody's different. Parents are still learning how to be adults. But we got to find one person in that child's life. When I talk with children, I don't work directly with children, but I talk to a lot of children. Find that one person that is their biggest supporter. Is there a grandmother that's always there supporting them? Is there somebody, is there a coach? Is there a teacher that sees something good in them? And then give them a reference point. Because we can tell children all day long the stove is hot, but until they touch that, they don't know what hot is, right? So it's all about creating references in children and people's minds about, hey, you know what? Like, I know what that's like, so let me actually choose a different way. And we find out who we are by who we're not. And so that's where true transformation is not about addition, it's about subtraction. Let me let go of these things. Let me not carry that anger, that bullying, that resentment, and pass it along towards, other people. Now, I don't want to be naive again. There is darkness as there is light. And unfortunately, that's the world we live in, the polarities of things. And typically people that are doing negative things probably think they're doing the best thing in their interest, So again, right, we can look at crime and stuff like that there's malice there. However, what I'm trying to get at is we have a choice. And you really have to think of what resonates with you that makes you feel whole, feel loved. Because resonate is a term for vibration, right? Yeah. When a guitar string resonates, it vibrates. We are vibrational beings within a quantum world, right? That's quantum physics there. We are all made up of atoms, which are 99.139 empty space. But we have the consciousness to fill that space. And so we have the ability through our choices to directly affect our lives. And so that's a lot there. But as far as to tell children, hey, your biggest supporter, your biggest coach needs to live in your own head, and you need to support yourself.
Yeah, I mean, from that last bit to Newton's third law of motion, to Occam's razor, to just plain don't get mad at someone because you don't know what they're going through, and everything in between. We had a good therapy session in what was supposed to be a podcast, but hey, this has been so insightful and so just enjoyable to be a part of. And this is only part one of our series. We've got a lot more coming with our discussion with Jonathan Boncek. So as we wrap up part one of our mini series, part one of I don't know how many, because this guy is a wealth of knowledge and information. As we wrap up, remember that in the face of adversity, there's always the potential for growth, resilience, and success. So join us every other Monday, including 2 Mondays from now, as we get the next part of our story with Jonathan Boncek, as we continue to explore more inspirational stories of overcoming challenges to help you thrive in your journey of life. And we're going to talk to him more about his business and what he does now professionally, and hopefully there's just as much to glean from that as there was from our general conversation today.
Thank you, Neil. I appreciate it.
Of course.